Professor Serafin, why is it that some of these measures keep getting renewed and extended? We're no longer in a declared state of emergency, and a lot of these measures are not even legislated. They are imposed by regulation or by order of unelected public health officials. Do you have views on whether these measures should have clear time limits, like sunset clauses, and clear criteria about what's required to end restrictions? In the last segment, we talked about we just don't know what the criteria will be to end these restrictions.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, I do. The measure should be subject to sunset clauses. And I think that one of the biggest issues that we've had is just communication of what the different measures involve and what it will take to remove the measures once they're in place. And I think public confidence in particular would have benefited from clear guidelines on these points right from the get-go, frankly.
Yeah, 2 years to flatten the curve, right? Professor Alford, do you have an opinion on this, the lack of clear criteria and the lack of clear time limits?
Well, it's shameful. In Ontario, we have a statutory framework under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. It had all of these requirements for sunset clauses, it had requirements for justifiability, and it was thought out as a clear policy response to SARS, that in every emergency, you need to be tied to the mast like Odysseus, because if you're not, you're going to take whatever measure appears to be justified in the heat of the moment. And then, sin in haste, repent at leisure. So these durable protections that are supposed to prevent the government from governing by fiat were bypassed completely. And the Ford government says, well, rather than relying upon what we worked out in the cool, clear light of dawn after coming to our senses after the last emergency, we're going to depart from that entirely and make it up as we go along with the new legislative framework.
This was with the Reopening Ontario Act, correct? Where they extended the emergency measures without having a declared state of emergency.
For 2 years. And to allow for them to evade legislative responsibility entirely. Because what it allows you to do is to say, well, this is what the experts think. But there are no experts in these trade-offs. There are no experts in whether or not denying someone access to their dying relative in a hospital or a long-term care facility, it can be justified by lowering an R value.
Really, really important point. Professor Serafin, I want to ask you, do you think that the past 2 years will have a lasting impact on how much government intrusion into our lives the public is going to tolerate in the future?
Yes. I mean, whether that's a good thing or not is another matter, but I think the answer has to be yes. We've gotten used to this idea that the government should legislate or adopt, in fact, not even legislate, should adopt policies to protect us from any sort of perceived risk, right? And we're already seeing this in the United States, where now they're talking about, increasing road regulations to decrease the amount of death that's occurring on the roads, right? Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, all of this comes out of the sort of lessons learned from the COVID experience.
Professor Alford, your take on that same question.
They're going to have to decide what they want from government. And the caution that we typically give people is a government that's strong enough to protect you from everything that you fear is also strong enough to take away everything that you have. And sometimes they do.
In the last minute, Professor Alford, there have been some legal challenges to these measures, but success has been sort of at the margins. Are courts the right avenue for response, or does this require a governmental solution, a change in leadership perhaps?
Well, history tells us that courts are always very reticent to disturb emergency measures in the heat of the moment. They're just under tremendous pressure. And they're asked to take at face value the notion that if they were to uphold constitutional rights, they'd be putting a lot of people at risk. And that's a very difficult position to be in as a judge. Do justice should the heavens fall. So I think that when the climate changes and people's perception changes, I think we'll see a bit of a change in how it's dealt with in the courts, but hopefully the legislature takes the lead on this.